always protecting. Take First Alert. Welcome to This Week in Kansas with your host, Tim Brown.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Kansas. Thank you for being with us this morning. Lawmakers continue to try to balance the budget, but they are having a difficult time. It's almost a certainty that taxes will go up, but the big question is, which ones? Uber says it's pulling out of Kansas after the legislature votes to override Governor Brownback's veto of a controversial bill. Does this signal the possibility of similar moves in other states? And we'll also talk about liquor sales, renewable energy standards, and the governor's tip. But let's start with the money, and that is budget and revenue. And again, this is obviously what the legislature gets to struggle with the most as they try to wrap up this session, which may just keep going and going and going.
Well, I've had the fortunate ability to attend the Shrimp Peel, which is a benefit for the Special Olympics, which is always held on the first day of the legislative session in Topeka. I talked to a lot of friends up there. I've continued some conversations. It looks like this is going to be their last weekend. They get to come home till they get the job done. Mother's Day is important even for legislators. And so, you know, they're really struggling right now trying to find 2163 and something the governor will actually sign. There are those that say the governor has not given them much guidance in what he wants, and I think, you know, he's kind of like, well, why don't you guys sort it out and I'll see if I like it. The problem in some of the committees is that the conservative leadership in some ways appears to be the victim of their own success. They can't seem to get bills out of committee. They can't find the votes to do it. And in my watching on the sides, it does appear when I watch and speak with Senator Donovan that there's a little impatience there. They want to get the job done, go home like anybody else. Of course, they're looking at a $200 million hole that goes through this fiscal year and the next one. I think the downside of having a 2-year budget cycle has now come upon them, because now this 2-year budget cycle is going to go through the next election. The biggest problem they have is that everybody's up for election in the legislature in this cycle, and usually about the only time you can get a tax increase out of the Senate is the year after they're elected, so there's 3 years for voters to forget. I think I think sales tax is the way that is going to go. When you look at what House Tax Chairman said, if they need money in the bank right now, the only way that's going to come is sales tax. If you do income tax, that waits till the next fiscal year. If you do property tax, you know, we're all supposed to make our payments by May 11th. That isn't going to happen either, so you're looking at the first of the year for the next payment to come due. So if they need money right now to help them with cash flow, which I think the fact that they're delaying the refunds for 16 weeks is an evidence of the cash flow, even though they haven't admitted it, that they've got a cash flow problem. They need to make sure they don't run the account down to zero, considering that's been kind of a banner for them to hoist. Try to hoist the Democrats on their own petard with that one. You know, they don't want to see that happen. So, you know, it's a very difficult time. When we look at the public polling, I think that we can see strong support for sales tax increase as opposed to the other two legs of the stool. Property tax comes in a close second. Income tax is dead last in what people want to see increased. They also want to see excise taxes increased, the majority. The non-smokers and the non-drinkers want to see the excise taxes increased on alcohol and tobacco. So, I mean, that's the nutshell. I know I've gone too long. Thank you.
You know, Phil, it's interesting that you mentioned the income tax increases, which, you know, the governor has been dead set against making any kind of change in the stuff that he managed to ram through back in 2012. But it's interesting that that's dead last, because the most interesting activity I think that I've seen on a part of at least a few Republican legislators up in Topeka is, you know, their willingness to question those 2012 cuts, particularly in the way that it enabled thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, to incorporate themselves as small businesses and therefore escape paying any kind of income tax whatsoever. This is the sort of thing that has led Susan Wagle and some other very strong supporters of the governor to say, well, you know, maybe we have a basic fairness issue here. I mean, when you've seen a 75% increase in the number of small businesses declaring themselves under this no income tax law, and you haven't seen the consequent increase in actual employment, you know that you've just got a lot of people that are taking advantage of the situation.
When we look at the statistics, and I know you're talking about the Kansas
Yes,
Speak survey.
Kansas Speak survey.
We went over a couple of weeks ago on the show. Part of that Kansas Speaks survey, it talked about, yes, income taxes were third, but it also, there was another portion of that survey that said that
Tax the rich.
Tax the rich people.
Yeah.
So
that's because most people aren't rich.
Exactly, and I think, yeah, and I think most people probably think, well, don't increase my income taxes, but that guy over there.
And increase the big corporations.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because the big corporations, the C corps, didn't get a tax break. Yeah. It was only the little ones, the subchapter S and the LLCs, that got the tax break. Mm-hmm. The little guys, where you see most of the job growth. So I think what we look at, when I look at Kansas Speaks and when I talk to people out there, I think we do see some that say, you know, and I think that it's reflected in the legislature too, that the wealthiest among us have gotten too much and that needs to come back. And I think that the legislators are going to have to divine the recipe that, I mean, they want to find out how to get reelected. Mm-hmm. And they've got to be workmanlike in this, because it's one thing to get elected, it's another thing to govern. And now they have to show their expertise in governing. And the biggest problem for freshmen is, and there's a lot of freshmen up there. I mean, in the last 4 years, over half the House is new. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem with them is they almost all ran on a I ain't going to increase taxes mm-hmm. position. And now they're going to have to come home and explain why they couldn't do that.
Yeah. You know, Russell, it's an interesting point made by Judge Journey a moment ago about the tax refunds and the fact mm-hmm. that we're seeing such a delay on that, and you know, I think the skeptic and probably all of us would agree with what you said.
This isn't the first time this has happened either. I mean, there have been other administrations, particularly I was trying to think it's Parkinson or Sebelius, where they held them for a while. Yeah. You know, the other issue with the income taxes is they had 80,000 returns on Monday. They hadn't opened yet. And you know, and and they're sitting there going like, well, maybe there's some checks in there. Yes, there probably are, but there's also a lot of demands for refund. I think that the vast majority of tax forms filed generally get refunds, but you know, the late filers, the ones that wait to the last minute like me, usually have to write a check. So, you know, I can understand that sword cuts both ways. But you know, the Secretary Jordan of the Department of Revenue, he had a bunch of temporary DCF employees, the children and families people. They come on over and open some envelopes for us, would you please? So they're dealing with that just about as quick as they can.
Yeah. Going to be challenging. In education, schools, the lawsuit, we saw some action this week, and that will ultimately have an impact as well, I'm guessing. I don't know that...
Oh, that lawsuit
it's already
is
got
running.
An impact. I mean, how many school districts across Kansas ended up ending their school year early? About 8, 9, 10, something like that?
Right now there's testimony going on in the 3-judge panel's lawsuit. The Supreme Court kicked it back down to the court and said, why don't you take some more testimony, and we're going to let you run with this. Yep. You know, they don't want their fingerprints on it yet, for good reason, given the political climate. The hearing has been going on. Yesterday, the superintendent from Hutchinson testified. There's a really good article that's probably going to run in tomorrow's Eagle. Well, that would be Saturday's Eagle because we're taping on Friday. By the way, thank you for moving from Thursday. And it looks like, what the interesting thing that came out in the testimony was, for example, USD 259 Wichita gets 11% of the state's, has 11% of the state's total student population. But they get 14% of the money, over 14, almost 14 and a half. And that's because of the weighting, and that's because of the weightings for English as second language, you know, subsidized reduced lunches. Yep. What's funny is the rich districts feel left out of this whole process. And you know, Shawnee Mission had a lawyer go up to the lawsuit, and you know, they were arguing that, you know, Judge, if you're going to give more money to these poor districts, why don't you let us raise our property tax too? And Judge Tice didn't seem very happy with that. He suggested that Shawnee Mission, if they wanted more state aid, they should contact Kansas City, Kansas, and see if they could borrow a few of their low-income students.
Yikes.
So.
I bet that went over well.
I thought it was funny.
Guys, we have to take a commercial break. We are running away with our time. We will come back. We'll talk about Uber a little bit. We'll be back in a minute.
When we first worked with Kitchen Tune-Up, it was at another residence. They met our deadline, our timelines, choices that they had, and the selections that they gave us were very much to our liking. Kitchen Tune-Up was awesome.
You are about to witness television history.
From the man who brought you Survivor and The Voice, the most challenging game ever created.
10 seconds, the artist, you got it!
500 questions, a 7-night event, coming Wednesday, May 20th on ABC.
We've been thinking. A pitcher who can paint the corners is known as a Rembrandt. Who doesn't love that kind of precision? At GMC, we get that. Not everyone can deliver a 95-mile-an-hour Rembrandt. This is precision. This is GMC. Now during the GMC Spring Sales Event, get over $10,000 total value on specially equipped 2015 Sierra SLE models in stock the longest. Welcome to the show.
And welcome back. Uber says it's done in Kansas. Looks like that's going to happen. And they are upset that the governor's veto was done away with by the legislature, which is interesting. You know, this is, again, a couple of points about this that I think is kind of interesting. This, again, shows that the governor doesn't have blind leadership over, I guess, blind followers.
He doesn't have blind followers, yeah.
It also kind of strikes me as interesting, too, because I wonder if other states will look at this and if it will have any impact.
Well, Kansas is not alone in passing similar legislation. Basically, the legislation said, you know, these drivers need a background check, kind of like a bus driver. That sounded reasonable to many.
Or a taxi driver.
Also that there needed to be enough insurance that there was like a hole in a private policy when they're doing commercial work with a private policy, and so, you know, they need to get special little rider on there to protect the people in case there's an accident or something like that. Uber has used this, pulled this card out several times, but they haven't seemed to play it. They haven't played it in Kansas City, Kansas. They haven't played it in Los Angeles. I got an email from Forrest Knox, Senator Forrest Knox, and he showed, he had a couple articles in there I couldn't quite get to because I was running out of time to get here, but where in other jurisdictions they claimed they were going to do it, but they didn't.
Uber's, you know, played this game in multiple different ways in different states. I mean, in Virginia, you know, it was a case of Uber being kicked out, and then, you know, the legislature kind of backed off on some of its demands, and Uber compromised on a couple of its demands, and then Uber moved back in. In Nevada, you know, this argument is still currently going on. I don't think a whole lot can be read into this particular dispute between, you know, the legislature and the governor, at least not ideologically. I mean, you know, the Uber question, it cuts across a lot of different lines. I mean, it's old economy versus new economy. You got a variety of different types of vested interests. The people that defend Uber are a lot of people that present themselves as, you know, defenders of the internet economy, you know, somewhat more libertarian, somewhat more free market oriented, whereas, you know, some people can present themselves as defenders of traditional business models and whatnot. I think that there's probably more smoke here than fire in this particular override.
Well, you know, it does strike me as interesting. I think the folks that defend Uber, why, if taxi companies have to do this, why shouldn't Uber have to?
Well, sure. I mean,
what's, that's just
Uber is all over California, and California has more extensive rules than this bill would have imposed in Kansas. So. Same thing can be said for multiple different states across the country.
I have used Uber before in big cities, and it.
Well, I'm going to New York City next week. We'll see. I may give it a try. Yeah, I'll give it a try.
Download the app, give it a shot. See what you think.
You know, I think it is politically unique that a Republican-controlled legislator overrode the Republican governor's veto. I know how hard it was when I engineered the override of Governor Sebelius's veto a couple times, and. It is not a small feat, and I think that was also the fruit of Uber's failure to follow the dictates of Dale Carnegie and his lobbying book. And, you know, there's still a lot of resentment over that, and the reality is
Uber definitely has a national reputation of playing a lot of very hardball tactics. In their defense, you could argue that they were going up against taxi cartels.
I don't know, they tried to hire the governor's former chief of staff. That didn't work for him either, so as their lobbyist. So, you know, I mean, they just don't understand. So that's okay.
Interesting. Well, I guess we'll see what happens, see if they actually do pull out or not.
Nah, they won't.
You don't think so?
Nope.
All right, let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about liquor sales, renewable energy standards, and a bunch of other stuff.
If you like quality and selection, you'll love Yoder's Ornamental Concrete in Burton with the best selection of fountains, bird baths, planters, benches, yard lights, animals, and figurines. You're sure to find the right piece for the right spot at your home or office. Since 1984, the Yoder family has been committed in making the finest of quality statuary, the largest statuary outlet in Kansas, located on Highway 50 in Burton, Kansas. That's Yoder's Ornamental Concrete.
It's Mattress Firm's Memorial Day premiere sale with our lowest prices of the season. Through Tuesday, get a Sealy Posturepedic Firm Queen set for just $398.99. Experience the all-new Beauty Rest Black Hybrid exclusively at Mattress Firm. And get up to $300 in free Mattress Firm bonus cash when you purchase a Beauty Rest Black Hybrid mattress set. Plus, pay 0 down and 0 interest for 5 years. We guarantee our low price or your mattress is free. So don't miss Mattress Firm's limited time Memorial Day premiere sale.
And welcome back. You know, we talked on the show just, I think, last week, the week before, about the liquor sales situation in the state of Kansas. And I made the comment that I hadn't really heard a lot about it. It seemed like it was kind of quiet. And then, you know, we got a few mailers, but
yeah,
it just seemed like it wasn't getting a lot of attention in the media,
a couple of
perhaps.
full-page ads in the Wichita Eagle just recently.
Then boom,
so,
here we are. And, you know, I think it's got a good chance of passing at this point.
I think that the current compromise bill, which is going to allow different counties to vote on whether grocery stores and convenience stores are going to be able to sell full-strength liquor, I think it's probably going to pass, simply because, you know, in our political culture, it's not easy to make a persuasive argument against allowing a vote to go forward. Even though, when you kind of take a look at the playing field and the campaign resources that certain players are going to be able to bring to bear on that playing field, maybe that's not the fairest approach to take. Still, it's a hard one to argue against, because the folks pushing for the bill are simply going to say, hey, we're just asking for the people in every county to be able to decide for themselves.
You know, Phil, I know how you feel about this one. You emailed me earlier this week, and we were talking during the break a little bit. But is nostalgia, is that the only reason to keep things the way they are, and is that worth keeping things the way they are?
Well, as I understand the opponents to the bill's positions, the problem one is that it will have greater availability, and that'll cause more consumption and more social problems. The other issue is, of course, that mom and pop stores are easier for the state to regulate. And, you know, if you have to go up against the big box store, we all know which one I'm thinking of, that is in, you know, most of the smaller towns or larger towns in Kansas, it's going to be another issue that they're going to have to deal with. I think that the regulation of the big box stores might be more complicated for ABC and those. It'll be an interesting question. There's always been a strong set of proponents in the legislature for the mom and pop stores, and this is the last mom and pop. But of course, you know, some like Dick Kelsey were all in favor of opposing legislation like this, and we saw what that got him too. So.
Yes, we did. You know, this is one of those where I'm torn, I must admit, because I do share your feeling in the mom and pop, and it is kind of nice to see that still surviving. And I fear that, you know, when the big stores do get this, if they do get this, I think just logic dictates a lot of those will go out of business.
Well, I think one of the other arguments,
one
of the other arguments is that, you know, about the only privately owned liquor stores are going to be the ones that like sell single malts and go outside the normal mainstream market for alcoholic beverages that try to do the specialty stuff. And those will probably be about the only ones that are left, because, you know, it's more business off of Main Street and more money flowing out of the state and going back to the big box stores' corporate headquarters.
Let's talk about renewable energy standards. Russell, this was an interesting one because there was a bit of a compromise that happened, and I think both sides agreed to this. I don't know how willingly some of them agreed to it, but they did. And so we're seeing some changes with our renewable energy standards in the fact that a little more voluntary, I suppose you could
basically
say.
making them optional. In an interesting sort of way, you know, if you think of it on, you know, the level of political behavior and political ideas, it's the same sort of debate or a similar sort of debate as to what's going on with liquor sales. I mean, basically what you're seeing is a proposal that nominally doesn't suggest any kind of substantive change. But you recognize that practically speaking, when the people with real agendas get to the point of making decisions, it probably will result in very, very substantive changes. If renewable energy standards are no longer mandated for electric companies and utilities to make part of their portfolio, then how many of them will continue to actually make use of those? Some of them will in some ways, and there might be ways in which, wind companies, which thankfully have been able to escape the excise tax that was also being tossed around, maybe they're going to be able to present themselves as still affordable to these utilities. But still, I mean, it's going to overall affect the degree of commitment that these private companies show to pursuing renewable energy sources. And it's done under the veneer of saying, well, we're just going to let people choose. Well, yes, letting people choose for themselves is a great idea, but when the players are not at all equal in terms of their ability to affect choice, there's downsides to that.
The gun to the head of the wind energy group was the tax change. They were going to, it's property tax. They were going to change the way it was valued and under which rate these wind generating facilities would be charged. And that was the gun to their head. And they're going like, okay, don't pull the trigger. We'll go along with this, no problem. Essentially, back during the Parkinson administration, this mandate was put upon the big electric companies like Westar and said, you got to get 20% of your power by 2020 from wind energy. Now, if that mandate's gone, these corporations are going to be beholden to those they are responsible to, and that's their shareholders. And the reality is that it takes an awful lot of money to get this wind generation up. It doesn't really help you a lot in peak times when the wind's not blowing. You still got to burn the natural gas to keep the air conditioners running. And so, they're gonna go to the cheapest power source they can. That's what their shareholders mandate, and that's what officers do. And wind costs more than natural gas, and it costs more than coal, and our carbon footprint will get bigger. And a lot of people that really care about this issue,
and a lot of people
the environmentalists, they weren't at the table.
That's right.
And they're complaining all the way.
And you're right about how a lot of people care about it. I mean, in that same poll that you were showing before, I mean, something like 75% of the Kansas population were saying, well, yeah, we're in favor of, requiring electric utilities to incorporate wind energy and other renewable sources. And those people didn't affect what was happening in Topeka, obviously.
If they don't see their electric bills go up, they might just overlook that desire. We'll see.
There you go. Let's take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about Sam Brownback's tip. We'll be right back.
If you think about it, the plumbing system in your house is really not so different than the plumbing system in your body. Over time, they both become less reliable. Nobody knows that better than the experts at Benjamin Franklin Plumbing. Hey, Chris, how's the patient?
Bottom's rusted out.
Point is, if you don't take care of your plumbing will let you down.
This one's leaking.
That is embarrassing. For maintenance and replacement programs, call Benjamin Franklin Plumbing.
Hey, Mike, do you smell gas?
Gas? No, not me.
Wake up in your first home. Wake up in a home you've made a bit bigger. Wake up in a home with a new address. Wake up in a home that doesn't even have an address. As your life evolves, your dream home evolves too, and protecting it takes committed support. At American Family Insurance, we support your dreams.
And welcome back. Poor Governor Brownback. The guy just wants to get a bite to eat. And what happens? He gets a waitress on her last.
He gets a piece of her mind, along with his piece of pie.
But as a governor, as an elected official, you get pieces of people's minds all the time. And the governor was perfectly okay with that.
And that was the point. We were talking about this a little bit in the break. That's the point I want to make in this whole thing. I think the governor handled this quite well. I think the governor did exactly what he should have done. She's entitled to her opinion. He tipped her anyway. He was a gentleman about it. I think he came out smelling like a rose. Clive Barker, on the other hand,
I want to tell everybody who he is.
Go right ahead. You could.
He's executive director of the Republican Party
for the state.
For the state party.
And Clive took umbrage to this statement.
It's just such a strange phenomenon to realize that somebody in that kind of position of power and influence in this day and age can be still so clumsy and crude in the way you make use of social media.
He doesn't have any power. Where do you get that?
look at all the news stories about the guy.
Well, that's because he's like
there
a
were
press
dozens
secretary.
of people that went on the Facebook page to complain about the waitress, who, by the way, was a perfectly adequate waitress. This was her last shift. She'd already given notice she was going on to a different job. She said, oh my gosh, I get to be able to communicate with the governor on my very last night of work. I'm going to tell him what I think. And the governor was like, yeah, well, that happens.
Yeah, but okay, come on.
And then all sorts of people comment on the Facebook page, but then Clay Barker decides to comment on it.
She writes it on the check. Then
Writes,
she takes
"Tip
a
the
photo of
schools."
it.
Yeah,
and she posts it online.
On her
Well,
Facebook.
you know, she was talking with friends of hers on Facebook. But the governor's here. What should I do?
What should I do? Yeah. It's a really neat story. If our viewers haven't read it,
Oh, it's
it's
great.
worth searching.
Yeah, she wrote
yeah.
in the tip area, she put an X through it and said,
Tip the schools.
Tip the
Tip the
schools.
schools.
Yeah. And the governor went ahead and gave her a tip and was nice about it. Clive Barker, though, got online. He wasn't, and you were laughing about this during the break. They didn't come to him for a quote.
No.
He got on a newspaper's.
Right, he goes to KSN's website and goes to their Facebook page, and he starts unloading on Chloe Hoof, that's the name of the waitress, just calling her arrogantly stupid, and this is typical of the liberal Kansas media. And by the way, I wonder exactly what media he reads if he thinks that Kansas's media is typically liberal. I mean,
The Lawrence Daily World.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that speaks. I'm sure that speaks for the whole breadth
The Kansas
of
City
Kansas
Star.
media.
Duh.
Right there. Sure.
Well, and then when he had the opportunity to kind of back off, he did not. So anyway, I don't know what the fallout will be. There probably won't be any real fallout from this, but it was interesting, and it did garner national attention, which that's kind of
Which I'm sure
right there.
Mr. Barker threw fuel on the fire with.
But absolutely.
You know, here's
It
here's
just
the real
increases
point.
his
I think.
persecution complex.
Well, and you know, I was going to go along those lines. Yeah. You know, many people feel in some ways it's time to circle the wagons because governing right now has become so difficult. And this is just one symptom of that attitude. And the reality is, of course, that if you're going to govern, you have to listen to everybody. You have to pay attention. And you take it all in, and it, like the answer just drops out the bottom of the sieve. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if somebody's got that opinion, that didn't bother anybody. It's their opinion.
Phil, you made a point once, and I thought this was really one of the more brilliant things you've ever said.
Oh, if I could get my wife to agree with that, I'd have it made.
You've had 2 or 3.
You know.
I don't know how many years you've been on the show, but you've had a couple. But this is...
You're very generous tonight, too.
I know. You talked about governing being like a football game. It's not Hail Mary passes. It's a bunch of 2 yards in a cloud of dust, 2 yards in a cloud of dust, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And I think that's what politicians oftentimes don't get, particularly these freshman legislators that you talk about a lot of times. I think that is a real learning process for them.
It is. And, you know, I mean, the diametric change rarely, if ever, happens. And the reality is that when you move public policy, you have to choose your battles, and, you know, you have to decide, okay, are we going to run to the left, or are we going to run to the right? Are we going to go up the middle? And the reality is that too many people play checkers and not enough play chess. Mm-hmm. And
you're just full of them.
You know, there's a lot of checker players right now.
Let's face it, one of the reasons
politics.
why there are a lot is because, as you pointed out, so many people in the legislature, particularly the House, came in as freshmen as part of the Brownback Revolution, and they really felt as though, oh, this is our moment to dramatically transform this state. And one, it's not working out for them. And 2, they've realized on the path towards transformation, there's a lot of other problems
they make
we
the
have to
huge
deal
mistake. They make the huge mistake of saying that a 6-point spread is a mandate.
Yeah.
Well, and I
And
said
that's
this
a
a couple of
huge
years ago.
mistake.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And they got it. And that was, I think that's the challenge now. Guys, we're out of time. Thank you very much for being on the program. Thank you for watching the show. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at thisweekinkansas@kick.com. Hope you have a wonderful day.